Hello! We're about to be doing a tier list ranking the human species from all tomorrows based on how based they are. Now there's a couple prefaces that I gotta say for this to make any sense. Number one, what is all tomorrows? All Tomorrows is a book about the
future evolution of humans.
And you don't really need any more context than that. Actually, you probably really do.
But, regardless.
2. What is based is a meta-ironic term, meaning, you know, sometimes it's used ironically, sometimes it's used sincerely, and you can never really tell. For the purposes of this video, it's extremely ironic, okay? The definition that we're going with right now is the more horrendous a political opinion is, the more based it is. For example, you know, being a centrist, not based at all. Being a totalitarian centrist that purges anyone with even a smidgen of a political opinion. Now that's based. And then now to me with a different shirt and a different pillow, because I recorded this on a different day. And then the final preface is subscribe. 70% of you aren't even subscribed. And let me just tell you this. That's not based. That's not based. So if you like my videos in any kind of way, I would highly recommend you leave a like and subscribe, because it's only a matter of time before I have the power to force you to do it. So you might as well just, you know, do it ahead of time. Anyway, we're gonna start off with the first species of humans, and that is humans. Wow. Generally, we just kind of live. Most of our history has been just trying not to die, right? But, you know, at a certain point, we start going from just surviving to thriving. And one of the greatest human pastimes is finding out great ways to kill each other. We have a long history of this, so we can really go from super mega based and A tier to being mostly D tier and based, just being hunter-gatherers, right? Which actually, now that I think about it,
that's pretty based too.
So I'm gonna put them in B tier. Next up, we have the Martians. Now the Martians are Earth people, except on Mars. They just kind of live there. They got uglier, which, okay. They took part in a war that would destroy billions of people, which is, you know, based, but they didn't even declare the war. The humans did. So, like, what are they even doing? So honestly, the Martians really go to a D tier. They're not that based. Next up, we have the Star People. After the war between the Martians and the Earthlings, they were like,
hey guys, let's not do this again.
Which is already not that based. And they decided, okay, let's just make us all the same species. So they made the Star People. All the, you know, human peoples ended up becoming the Star People, which I doubt that everyone would just do that of their own volition. So they probably forced people to do it, and bare minimum sterilized anyone that didn't want to comply, which is pretty horrendous. But they went off to build Utopia, and they lived like that for millions of years. Boring. Come on, do something.
Brutalize each other.
What is this Utopia stuff? So honestly, I'm gonna put them in C tier. Should I take off my glasses? They're like kind of glaring. Anyway, the next up is the Q. They are fanatic zealots that are hell-bent on destroying the galaxy and then recreating it. So they pulled up, they're, you know, like dragonflies with guns, which is already pretty sick, and they just started manhandling humans, well, the Star People, which, to be honest, they kind of deserved, because What are you doing? Just building Utopia. Come on, do something interesting. So their fanatic zealotism and the brutality that they did it with is insanity. You're gonna see in the future. Right now, just trust me when I say they're actually god tier in baseness, because they are probably the most
Horrendous things to have ever existed.
Well, they never existed.
but in the book, and therefore are the most based. So they go into god tier. Now we're getting into territory of humans that were affected by the Q. First up, we have the worms. They're worm people. They just kind of crawl around in the mud, and they just eat and fuck. You know, sometimes they'll bump into each other, and they're like,
Oh, is this food or is this sex?
and sometimes they'll just eat you, which is super based. Honestly, I'm gonna give them D tier because they're generally just do-nothers. What? They do nothing. Next up, we have the Mantelopes, which were the Q's secretaries. Oh, okay. They were human antelopes. The Q made human antelopes, which is just, once again, justifying why they are at god tier. The Mantelopes were just super depressed because they were really smart, but also antelopes, and eventually just became normal antelopes. So honestly, F tier, not that based. Like, sure, depression, but it's not enough. It's not enough. Temptors. Okay, these are pretty much
Monstrosities.
also made by the Q, and they live in a totalitarian hive society. Come on! The little dudes just run around this little hole creature with holes, just doing whatever they're told through the pheromones and stuff, which is
pretty base.
but they don't really do much. So I'm gonna give them a solid B tier, maybe lower A tier. B tier. The Colonials. Okay, now these were star people that actually fought back against the Q, like, successfully, for 2 times, then they got brutally conquered, and the Q was like,
Oh, dude, why would you do that? Now we have to turn you into lumps of flesh.
that still are extremely intelligent and recognize everything that is happening to them. So they were essentially filter feeders. They were the toilet of the Q, and they were ensured to just understand everything that was happening, which is only approving more of the basedness that is the Q. But they're not really that cool. They're filter feeders. I'll give them some props because they fought against the Q for a little while, but not much else. D tier. The Tool Breeders. People might be like,
Oh, the tool breeders are cool.
they were dolphins. Okay, they're cool dolphins, and they lived under the water, under the sea,
Under the sea.
and they used everything around them as their own tools. There was no fire, there was no nothing, so they bred their tools. They had TVs made out of fish. Everything was made out of other fish. So essentially, they had a slave society. Everything was built around these slaves, which is horrible. Lopsiders.
They're disgusting.
They lived on high gravity planets, and they didn't like that, so they just evolved in their society and eventually got to the space age and left. And didn't do much other than that. F tier. Boring. The asymmetrical people. Now these are the evolved versions of the Lopsiders. The Lopsiders couldn't really survive anywhere other than a place with high gravity. They wanted to escape that, so they made the asymmetrical people. People that looked kind of like them, not really, that could survive on normal gravity planets. And you would think they would be like, you know, cool about it, like,
Oh wow, thanks Lopsiders, thanks for giving us this awesome life.
but no, they were like,
Okay.
and made the Lopsiders not breathe anymore. Just annihilated them, which is horrendous and then therefore based. The hedonists. They were just sinners. They were just sinners. They ate, they fucked. And that was it. Gluttony, lust to the maximum. And guess what? That's pretty based. They didn't do much else. You know, they weren't really hurting anyone. They were just living their best lives. So I give them a B. Next up, the Satyriacs. The Satyriacs are the evolved form of the hedonists, and they ended up making a normal society, which sucks. Come on. They just lived normal lives and only engaged in gluttony and lust and other sins every once in a while. Come on.
Be more degenerate.
Like, ugh, boring, not based. D tier. Next up are the Gravitals. Now these are post-humanists, dude. They're robots. They descended from the Ruin Hunters, which were just people that lived on a planet not tremendously crushed by the Q, so they were able to advance in technology much faster than the other humans, and eventually just became post-humanists. They were like,
Release me from this mortal form.
which is pretty based, okay? Who's a post-humanist? Nobody. Maybe Elon Musk, that's it. But this would only really land them at, you know, C, maybe B if I was feeling nice. But they were assholes. They were complete and utter assholes. They essentially made the Q look like a joke. They went around blocking out suns so that everyone would just freeze to death. And if they somehow survived, they would just turn them into monstrosities, like the Q, except even worse. You know, sometimes they would just turn a human into a record player for a single song. Imagine you wanna hear "Hit Me Baby One More Time." You don't pick out your CD. No. You pick out your genetically modified servant, whose only task is to do that. Horrendous. Therefore, they're in the god tier. Next up, we have the Spacers. Now these are humans that escaped the Q, which, come on, just get what's coming to you. Ugh. They lived on asteroids, because they're like,
Are they gonna find us? No, they're not.
Sometimes they were found.
but the ones that weren't found eventually evolved to survive on these asteroids, and they developed a highly functional sphincter to just fart their way around the asteroid. Which isn't inherently, like, awful, right? But it's still based in my opinion, and my opinion is fact, and don't disagree with it, please. Actually, I'm not gonna ask. Just don't disagree with it. They get a C tier. They get a C tier. Next up is the evolved version of the Spacers, which are the astromorphs. Now this is the evolved form of the Spacer. They evolved even further to have, you know, more gas in the chamber, if you know what I mean. And they also evolved to just have 700 IQ, just be brilliant, you know? And eventually, they ended up fighting a crazy war against the Gravitals, because the astromorphs were like,
Yo guys, why did you kill everyone?
and the Gravitals were like,
How about you eat my balls, my robotic balls?
and also the Gravitals needed someone to unify against, because like half of them really wanted to fuck their cassette players and half of them were like, ew, gross. So they ended up fighting the war, and they lost hardcore. The astromorphs, you know, 700 IQ for the win. And then they humiliated them by turning them into servants, you know, like doing the same thing that they did to everyone else. And then they restored life across their galaxy under their firm totalitarian rule, but, you know, they restored it. So honestly, B tier. Now there's a lot of other species out there in this book that I didn't cover yet, but I think that's all I really have time for. Drop a like if you've gotten here, because you've obviously liked it enough to watch it. Dropping a like is super based. Actually, you probably really don't want to be based. Not dropping a like is based.
I don't know, just drop the like, it's not that hard.